And people are people. I keep on saying that all the time. Kids are kids. Kids are kids. If something works in some country, it should work in other countries. The only place where it doesn't fly, if it's got a very religious or very, you know, very spiritual, like India's properties are all based on their religion. So that may not fly outside of India, but still in India you got 1 billion people. So why aren't we doing something there, to use that issue relative to helping grow the NFT space and the collectible space. So I think these things have to be looked at, at one point globally, but also some of these countries have specific, cultures that you can't just force feed all of our stuff into that particular country. So I think there's a combination that has to be you have to try and find out about.
What is going on, ladies and gents? Welcome to Collectors Gone Digital. My name is Josh, and on today's episode, we are recapping Al Kahn's appearance on the Queen's Court. Now, if you guys don't know who Al Kahn is, he is a living legend responsible for companies like Pokemon and Cabbage Patch Dolls. He talks about some very insightful stuff in this video. I've recapped it down into 12 different points, so without further ado, let's kick it off with point number 1. So after briefly explaining why he changed his company name from Kidtagious, which had Epidemic IP, to Kidrageous in light of COVID, which makes a lot of sense, he starts a discussion around physical collectibles, and more specifically, is there anything real about them? So this is something that he's apparently been questioning. He talks about a recent project of his called True Extinction, which is comprised of things that exist or have existed before. So I'll be honest, I think he probably could have explained this part a little bit better, but what he says is that these are going to be collectibles that are truly unique because they are based on real things. So he uses the example of how he recently acquired over 250,000 comics, of which are apparently 50, 60, 70 years old, and a lot have actually never left the sleeve. He says roughly 70%. But while explaining this, he says that there's comics in there like Amazing Spider-Man. So I don't really think using the word real is maybe the best word, because Spider-Man obviously is not real. But I guess he's talking about things that have existed before or exist now that you just don't see too often or at all. Now, I do want to add, for those that did listen to the call, that at this point he starts talking a lot about point of difference. And if you've never heard somebody say that before, what they're essentially referring to is their value proposition, their competitive advantage. So what differs in his product versus his competitors. So he then moves on, and in his words, he talks about a couple things they are working on that are important to VeVe. So the first thing is how they're going to create a larger fan base. We've talked about this a couple times on the channel, but it sounds like they already have some ideas in place. Apparently, David is looking at a lot of new licenses, and some of these licenses, Al later confirms in the call, have large fan bases. And then he says the biggest element is creating a universe for VeVe in terms of the number of people. In this case, I would probably also argue in terms of our collectibles, because we want to be able to use them in more ways than we can now. Al then talks about a few reasons why he thinks people collect. The first one is going to be because it gives them a certain status. We obviously already know this, aka bragging rights. 2, it helps them with their own psyche, their own mentality for satisfaction. And then 3, there might be a very unique upside due to the collectible's rarity. And I think a fantastic example of this is going to be the #1 mint for the Funko hunt right now going on, and the $40,000 offer from David. So he's then questioned about NYC and what his experience was like over at the convention. He says that he found the community very interesting, and that lots of people were from the tech and crypto space. In his words, he says, if you can expand this community dramatically, what does that mean for the success of VeVe and the value of what VeVe offers? I can answer that. A lot of great things. He says that he feels that a lot of the people he met were actually in a similar place as him in terms of wanting a larger universe for our collectibles and the platform. And he was actually quite overwhelmed to how people look at the collectibles. So he says it's like being a baseball fan or a football fan, you're a VeVe fan. And that is a really good way of putting it. So Randy Chavez then asks, out of the 2 parties you attended that were amazing, what would you have changed or added? Now, Al's response to this is that the parties were apparently fairly selective. So he would have liked to have seen people who weren't such large members of the community. His exact words were actually more diversity, more inclusion. He did like, however, that there were so many women interested in VeVe. We talked a little bit about VeVe's growth so far. He says it's fascinating to see how VeVe is growing. It's growing organically. And we know that up until this point that has been true. Until recently, they have now turned on ads. He says the project is going to continue to grow, but he wants to give it a little nudge. And he says they're actually going to be introducing some interesting ideas that should hopefully give VeVe that little nudge. So we then move into a discussion about Eastern markets. And Al actually uses India when talking about this. He says in places like India, you have your own subset of entertainment. The big brands in India are not the same brands that we see here in the West. I think a really good example of this is actually Mr. Beast on YouTube versus T-Series. I don't know if you guys are familiar with that, but the little competition in terms of most subscribers on the platform. T-Series is going to be based in India. He also talks about anime in Japan and how it's very popular at the moment. But he also adds that not much traction is in the NFT space. So we are going to need time for the market to evolve. Now, speaking of waiting for the market to evolve, it also comes down to adaptability. So Al mentions how the United States supplies most countries around the world with their source of entertainment. But in some countries where this is not the case, you're going to have to adapt your content to cater to their audiences. Now, when he said that, I thought about OREO. If you guys aren't familiar with their story, they had to really change their brand in order to enter the Asian markets. And if I actually remember correctly, I might be wrong here, but I believe the first time around they actually failed. As you can see on the right hand side, their marketing is going to be completely different, but at the same time their flavors are also like wild. Like they have like green tea. Most of them I actually can't read because it's in another language, but as you can see, they had to completely change their marketing to cater to audiences in Asia. If they didn't change anything and they just went in with the same look they have over here in the West, they would not have gotten the same response. Next up, Al talks about his interest in pairing NFTs with physical items for kind of verification and security purposes.
And again, what I think is going to happen is that the combination of NFTs and physical things, NFTs give you a provenance, right? They give you a tracking of where this thing came from, its authenticity, et cetera, et cetera. So the combination of an NFT with a physical thing could work, because again, both of those lead to a more complete story of what that is.
So he goes back to his previous discussion about how he acquired 250,000 comics. He mentioned how a lot of these comics actually have copyright issues because they were never copyrighted back in the day. In his exact words, he actually says that they've been knocked off a million different ways. So apparently in this collection, there are comics that are 70 years old that apparently nobody has ever heard of before. So Al is somebody who wants to understand exactly, their story, where they came from. And if these comics were on the blockchain, he would be able to do that. So Al provides a lesson on some characters that are in public domain. Now, you guys are taken care of on this channel. It's nothing that you guys wouldn't know if you have seen our previous videos talking about this. But Al says that just because an old version expires does not mean that a new variation can't be protected. And we know this with Mickey Mouse.
Yeah, but again, look, there's so many. I remember there were guys in the kids business who made all kinds of cartoons based on Disney characters, but people wanted they wanted the real thing too. That's the other side of this too. There's such a brand identity with Disney, and people that are Disney fanatics, you see them all the time. They don't want Winnie the Pooh from, Joe Schmo. They want Disney's Winnie the Pooh. Look, Peter Pan is public domain, theoretically. Peter Pan's copyrights expired years ago. That was owned but one place where it didn't expire is in England, because the author of Peter Pan gave an in perpetuity license to a children's hospital called the Oman Children's Hospital in England. And then the English government gave them an in perpetuity trademark. But Peter Pan is not protected, but Walt Disney's Peter Pan is protected. So you can, so anybody, even Mattel, who uses Tinkerbell, pays the Oman Children's Hospital every year to use Tinkerbell.
So Mickey was actually the one who was brought up here. I think it was Lori that asked about it. But Disney is not losing the rights to Mickey as a character. They're only losing the rights to the iteration of Steamboat Willie, or in other words, the first ever iteration of Mickey Mouse. So the current iteration of Mickey right now that Disney is using, it's fully protected. He also goes on to talk about characters like Peter Pan. So in Al's words, he says Peter Pan is not protected, but Disney's Peter Pan is. What he means here is the original Peter Pan that was created is not protected anymore. But Disney's current version of Peter Pan is. It's the same exact case with Steamboat Willie. And last but not least, he is asked, what's missing? Oh, wait, sorry, guys. That is not supposed to say what's missing. That is supposed to be saying VeVe IP. Whoopsies. Yeah, he was asked about, I think it was, would you like to see VeVe branded IP? And Al's response to this was, you know, there's so much that VeVe can do. I think the question here is, how clever can you get? So this is actually where he brings up McDonald's Happy Meals, which is interesting because we've actually talked about this one as well. But he talks about how the toys and Happy Meals have now been canceled because they want to avoid plastic waste. I did not know this. It's something like a 40-year tradition, he said. So if VeVe can get their foot in the door, this would be a tremendous opportunity to pair digital collectibles with Happy Meals. It would be no different from them offering a promo code at a convention, but just tossing it inside this meal. David has also mentioned in the past about how they're experimenting with a category on the app where this category would have a larger number of editions for each drop to cater to either younger demographics or just new users coming onto the platform. Al then talks about how there is actually a passionate collector community for these Happy Meals, and they actually meet at a convention every year, similar to Comic-Con and things like that, where they trade these toys. So he was using these Happy Meals as an example, but he goes on to say that they need to look for things that are disruptive, right? And not just what others are doing over and over again. And there's really not much more to add there. That's really well said. Ladies and gents, that's going to conclude today's episode. I hope you enjoyed. Those are 12 points that I took away from Al Kahn's appearance on the Queen's Court. The man doesn't pop up too much, but when he does, he really drops a lot of knowledge. So if you guys have any questions or any comments, make sure to leave them down below. As always, I want to see what you guys are thinking. Before I wrap things up, I just wanted to say happy Halloween to anyone who is celebrating. If you guys are taking the kids out, I'm sure you're not young enough to be a kid going out for candy, but if you're taking your kids out, watch the wrappers, be safe, and I hope you guys enjoy the night. If you guys enjoy the content, make sure to like and subscribe. Comment down below what you want to see in a future episode. And as for next, I'll catch you then.